The numbers were wrong, not drastically, but wrong in a way that required intent. I sat in the chair opposite our accountant while he walked through the year's portfolio. He spoke in calm, rehearsed phrases. I kept nodding, but my attention locked on a single line. One transaction, mid-April. A wire to a separate trust account, $22,500, labeled estate repositioning. I had not approved that transfer. I had never heard that phrase before. "Is this new?" I asked him. He glanced down, adjusted his glasses. It came through Emily's side. Her attorney's office filed the transfer paperwork directly. Standard process if a revocable trust is being reshaped. I held his gaze. "We do not share an attorney." He blinked once. "Then this may need a flag." I left the office without asking follow-ups. Not because I lacked questions, because I knew the first real answer had already surfaced. At home, everything appeared unbothered. She stood in the kitchen, scrubbing a baking sheet, humming to herself. She did not ask about the meeting. I did not offer details. I said I might work late this week. She nodded without looking up. Later that night, I checked the trust account myself. She had set it up 3 months ago under her maiden name. I pulled the formation documents. A new attorney, a different city, a contact number I did not recognize. The title of the entity used a family middle name, one she had not spoken aloud in 5 years. She had already begun separating the life we built. That realization should have come with shock. Instead, it settled with a kind of clarity I had forgotten was possible. I made no noise. I closed the browser. I sat in that chair for 27 minutes without moving. I knew because I watched the second hand complete each rotation. At 11:08 p.m. she walked past in a bathrobe, hair damp, expression unreadable. "I might sleep early," she said over her shoulder. Her voice was neutral, rehearsed. I nodded once. "I will be up a while." She said nothing else. When the bedroom door shut, I logged into the router's admin console. I began mapping every device connected to our home network. 2 unfamiliar MAC addresses surfaced, both Android, neither matching her known phone or tablet. One had been connected from 9:41 a.m. to 1:27 p.m. that day. I traced the DNS logs. Private browsing mode had masked history but not destination requests. Most were generic. One stood out. It was a secure client portal, the same law firm that filed the trust transfer. I captured a packet trace, saved it to a local drive, encrypted and stored. She had prepared more than I had assumed. But she had made one mistake. She believed I would not check. When I entered the bedroom an hour later, she was asleep, face turned away, arms folded tightly under the blanket. I watched her breathing pattern, steady, not peaceful, not anxious, just flat, like someone who had already detached from the consequences of their actions. I lay down beside her, eyes open, body still. She shifted once in her sleep, not toward me. I knew then this had already started long before April, and she had no idea I was now awake. She left before 7, wearing a new trench coat I had not seen before and carrying a laptop bag she usually reserved for overnight conferences. I stood by the window, sipping coffee I had no interest in drinking, and watched her reverse out of the driveway with practiced calm. She waved once. I raised the cup in response. She turned away too quickly to see that I had not smiled. She had said she was meeting a junior colleague for breakfast, something about mentorship and career coaching. I asked which restaurant. She hesitated a fraction too long before answering, then repeated it slower. She did not stumble, but she corrected, which meant she had lied once before correcting. I waited until the garage door clicked shut, then turned to my laptop. The restaurant she named did not show any reservation under her name or her phone number. I searched for every name she had used in professional spaces, married, maiden, hyphenated. Nothing. The place did not even open until 8, and her meeting was allegedly at 7. I opened our shared cloud account. Though she had changed many of her settings in recent months, she had forgotten one key detail. The company phone her employer issued still backed up location data to the business server. She had never fully disconnected it from her backup dashboard. Most people would not think to check. She had counted on that. The device pinged not in the city but 30 miles north, an office suite attached to a private legal mediation service. I pulled up the website. The listed firms included a boutique practice specializing in peace-forward separations, complex asset protections, and narrative consultations. That last phrase sounded like something she had underlined in a brochure. I screenshot the map, time-stamped the metadata, saved it into a folder I had created the night before, pre-discovery. Then I drove downtown. I parked in front of the actual restaurant, sat in the lot for 23 minutes watching the front entrance. A few couples walked in, one group of women in work clothes, no sign of her. At noon, she messaged, "Mentoring session went great, staying a bit longer, might work remotely here this afternoon. Hope your day's going well." No details, no question, no attempt to tether it back to me. I replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. Let her see detachment and mistake it for trust. When I returned home, I waited until she had texted that she was wrapping up and grabbing a smoothie before entering her office. The passcode had not changed. Her personal laptop booted up faster than I remembered. I installed a silent tracker I had built years ago for a cybersecurity audit client, a keystroke logger that stored activity in an encrypted local drive, disguised as a system update cache. It would capture everything. Typed words, file movements, private browser windows, downloaded documents. She would never see it. At 5:47 p.m. the logs began populating. By 6:22 p.m. she opened a folder titled Documentation. Inside were notes she had prepared for a mediation narrative. They were structured like journal entries but written with legal precision. Not for her, for someone else. For strategy. One entry described me as stoic but unresponsive. Another, "I often feel like a ghost inside my own marriage, seen but not touched." A third noted that I had severe rigidity around emotional vulnerability. None of these were raw. None of them read like catharsis. They read like a constructed persona designed for plausible sympathy. She walked in at 6:38 p.m. with a shopping bag and a casual smile. She offered to cook, played music while setting up vegetables. The playlist was one she had not used in years, soft jazz and late-night ambient vocals. She chopped peppers while humming to herself. The knife moved rhythmically. Her hands were calm, her body relaxed. Her eyes avoided mine, but not obviously. When I asked how the mentoring session went, she answered in full sentences, too full. Each detail preemptively addressed potential questions. She had practiced it. I asked no follow-ups. Later, she handed me a glass of wine and joined me on the couch. She leaned into my side and exhaled through her nose like she was letting herself settle. Her voice dropped a register. "I missed this," she said, not quite touching my arm. I nodded. "Me too." I let her believe it. It cost nothing. By 11:00 p.m. she had fallen asleep beside me. I waited 10 minutes, then retrieved the logs. She had spent the last hour reviewing a draft letter to her attorney. The letter described a pattern of emotional distance and subtle controlling behaviors she alleged I had demonstrated over the past 2 years. The language was uncomfortably clean, like it had been reviewed before, possibly rehearsed. She had not mentioned separation. Not in the house, not to my face. But the document was a strategic outline, a case in the making, a list of grievances, not discoveries, planned staging, not fallout. One paragraph described a therapist's early notes. I recognized the phrasing. It matched a conversation we had weeks ago, when she said her new therapist had helped her contextualize emotional neglect. At the time, I had assumed she meant her own. Now I understood the context was me. She had built an entire narrative in which I was emotionally vacant, methodical to a fault, incapable of holding space for her growth. She had been planning this longer than I had been awake to it. I stared at the final paragraph of her letter. "I do not wish to create conflict. I want an exit that reflects my values, dignity, truth, and non-adversarial grace." There was nothing graceful about preparing a strategic misrepresentation of someone's character under the mask of therapeutic empowerment. There was no truth in staging my presence as absence, and dignity did not look like pre-positioning yourself as the victim in a story no one else had read yet. I closed the file, encrypted the log, backed it up twice, and shut the machine. Then I sat in the dark room and watched the window. Outside, everything looked still. Inside, she had already started erasing me from the version of our life she intended to keep. She began using phrases that did not belong to her. Not overtly, not enough to trigger alarm on their own, but small, careful repetitions. Language shaped by legal coaching, filtered through therapeutic frameworks. She described our routines as cyclical, our conversations as lacking emotional reciprocity. One morning, while tying her shoes by the front door, she muttered, "Patterns of communication need to evolve or dissolve." It was not something she would have said a year ago. It sounded like something she had written down and been told to memorize. That was when I searched her calendar for recurring entries with generic labels. I found a session every Wednesday evening titled Consult. No location, no link, no identifying data. But the timestamp matched the router logs showing a secure VPN connection routing through a remote server. She had never mentioned therapy that used a masked connection. I cloned her local machine again. This time, I mapped outbound IPs. One resolved to a private advisory firm in Massachusetts specializing in narrative consultation for professional women navigating power transitions. That was their language, not mine. It was not therapy. It was narrative engineering, for legal positioning, for public explanation. That same night, I ran a network scan on our home printer's internal memory. She had printed draft affidavits. One of them stated that I had shown patterned reluctance toward shared emotional labor. Another used the phrase silent diminishing of her self-worth through dismissive body language. These were not descriptions of pain. They were scaffolding for a legal framework. Behavioral ammunition curated for future presentation. I saved them all. The following weekend, I asked if she wanted to have dinner at a place we used to go early in our marriage. Casual, intimate, unpretentious. She agreed quickly, too quickly. She wore a muted dress and little makeup. Not performance, but calculation. The version of herself that would seem sincere to a casual observer. She asked about my projects. Told me she had been thinking about shifting priorities, phrased carefully like someone rehearsing an identity pivot in soft tones. Midway through the meal, I leaned slightly forward. "Are you happy?" She paused just long enough to count, then tilted her head. "I think happiness evolves," she said. "Right now I am aligned." Not yes, not no, aligned, I nodded. "With me?" Her eyes did not flinch. "With myself." I let that silence expand. She sipped her drink, glanced out the window and pretended to watch a passing car. Her shoulders settled back as if she believed the conversation had passed. It had not. The next day, while she was in the shower, I pulled the small silver key from behind a false panel in my desk. The lockbox it opened contained 3 items: a backup hard drive, a document binder, and an audio recorder. The recorder had been added last. I placed it behind the bookshelf in our living room. Battery-powered, time-synced, and voice-activated. I did not need it to record everything, only what she said when I was not in the room. Over the next 10 days, I collected 14 conversations. One was with a friend I did not recognize. She described our relationship in soft-spoken past tense. "He means well, but I have outgrown the dynamic." Another was with someone named Ava. She mentioned the word strategy twice and referenced a window closing before Q4 asset reviews. But it was the call with the consultant that caught my attention. She said, "He will not resist. That is part of the problem. He is too still. I need contrast." Contrast. I knew what she meant. In order to justify the shift she was making, she needed me to perform resistance, to act out, to give her the foil her story required. She did not want separation. She wanted validation, a story that cast her transformation as necessary, one where I had become obsolete, not just inconvenient. But I refused to be written into her script. That week, I began updating my own records. I requested my therapy session transcripts. I reviewed financial statements and generated a comparative timeline showing all investments, withdrawals, and digital signatures. I met with a forensic auditor recommended through a quiet referral channel. When she asked if I wanted to attend a couples mindfulness workshop she had found, I agreed. We sat on cushions in a downtown studio while an instructor guided us through breathwork and spoken release. When it came time to speak, she said, "I have learned how to hear myself again." Her voice trembled faintly, practiced to sound spontaneous. I replied with a simple statement. "I have been listening the whole time." No one reacted, but her posture changed, slightly stiffer, not from guilt, from recognition. She understood that I had not missed a step. That night she lit a candle before bed and curled against my side. Her hand slid under my arm like it used to. "You are different lately," she said. I met her eyes. "So are you," she held the gaze. "Do you still trust me?" I let the silence stretch. Then I answered, "I trust evidence." She said nothing else. She turned out the light. Her breathing stayed shallow for longer than usual. The next morning she asked if we could talk sometime this week. Said she had something to discuss about our direction. I told her to name a time. She said, "Let me check with my schedule." But she already knew the script. She had written it, I just refused to play my part. The conversation she scheduled happened on a Thursday. She asked if we could walk, said she needed space to think aloud. I agreed. We followed the trail behind the old civic center, quiet, paved, flanked by trimmed hedges and benches that no one used. She began with slow, symmetrical language. "I have been reflecting on how our needs have evolved." Her pace was even. She kept her hands tucked in the pockets of her jacket, not from cold but from calculation. I said nothing. She continued, "I think we both know something has shifted. I have changed. You have too." She paused then, waiting for an invitation I would not extend. "I want to explore what separation could look like without making it adversarial. It is not about blame." There it was, her version of grace, scripted neutrality. I let the silence linger between us. We walked past a dried-up fountain. Leaves skated across the stone edge. She glanced at me, looking for tension. I gave her none. She shifted tactics. "I am not trying to erase anything we built. I just need something more congruent with who I am now." I nodded. "Who helped you write that?" Her step faltered. She stopped walking. "Excuse me, that sentence, you rehearsed it. I am asking if you paid someone to help you find it." She stared. "That is unfair." "No, it is precise." She looked away, jaw set. "This is what I mean. You reduce things to evidence and tactics. Because that is how you approached this first." Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. I resumed walking. She followed. Back home, she spent the afternoon in the guest room with the door closed. She emerged at dinner, composed but quiet. Asked if I wanted takeout. I said I already ate. She nodded, slow. No argument, no confrontation. She had hoped for more reaction. She needed me to become unreasonable. The next morning I contacted someone I had not spoken to in over a year. His name was Aaron. He ran data integrity reviews for litigation prep firms, quiet, legal, precise. I provided the document samples, audio recordings, metadata from her laptop, and the printed materials from the home printer. "Here is the rewritten version with proper attribution, embedded dialogue, and no back-to-back speaker lines." He called 2 days later, his tone clipped and analytical. "This is not casual," he said. "She has constructed a mosaic of reputational documentation, most of it recent, all of it anticipatory." I kept my voice level as I asked, "What would she use it for?" "Character framing," he replied without hesitation. "Internal HR leverage, court positioning, possibly press inoculation if it escalates publicly." I leaned back in my chair, letting the implications settle before asking, "Does it hold?" "It holds if you stay passive," he answered plainly. "It fractures if you show timeline conflict and premeditation." That evening, I searched the state public records portal for professional license filings. I found a document with her name, an application for corporate structuring guidance certification, filed as a solo practitioner, listing a business address I recognized as the same suite she had visited during her so-called mentoring breakfast. The attached statement included a section labeled Narrative Expertise and Spousal Resilience Coaching. She had not simply planned to leave. She had built a brand on her exit. That realization did not spark anger. It stripped away the last illusion of confusion. Her mentor was a name I recognized, Dr. Carl R. Henley. He had been my professor 12 years ago, ethics and persuasion in conflict arbitration. I had once admired him. She had mentioned him in passing 6 months ago. said she had met someone fascinating at a conference. Someone who understood how stories shape outcomes. I had not known she meant him. I had not realized he had become her architect. His publications were accessible online. I read 3 that night. All referenced a strategy he called narrative reformation for exit integrity, a method for managing the optics of departure, protecting the lever from reputational fracture by seeding controlled misalignments into the public record. She had followed it perfectly. She had called me dependable. She had described my emotional language as procedural. She had logged disagreements with timestamps and context stripping. But she had made one miscalculation. She had assumed that I would act emotionally when threatened. Instead, I documented. The next day, I filed for legal protections on all joint holdings. I froze lines of credit under both our names and initiated a review of signatures on any transfers above $5,000 for the previous year. The bank confirmed an irregular signature on a release form she had submitted. They opened a formal review of the transaction's legitimacy. She would be notified within days. I printed nothing. I said nothing. That evening she brought home sushi, my favorite order. She acted normal, said she missed the simplicity of shared evenings, sat beside me on the couch. "You feel distant again," she said softly. I met her eyes. "Do you feel closer to Carl?" Here is the revised version with embedded attribution and clear speaker identification. Her spine stiffened at the sound of my voice. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again as she set down her chopsticks with controlled care. "I do not know what you mean," she said, though the hesitation in her eyes betrayed the lie. I held her gaze without blinking. "Yes, you do." She did not respond immediately. Instead, she watched me for several seconds, as if weighing whether denial or silence would cost her less. "You were not supposed to find out like that." I said nothing. "I never meant to turn any of it against you," she added, quieter. I stood and picked up the plates. "You did not build a weapon, you built a stage." She did not follow me. She stayed seated, gaze unfixed, hands resting on the table like she no longer knew what gesture belonged to what version of herself. She had tried to write an ending. I had changed the script. She did not speak of Carl again. But his presence lingered in every move she made. She began adjusting her behavior in small, deliberate increments. No more clipped phrases, no more subtle performance. Everything softened. Her voice, her body language, her rhythm of speech, all altered to seem measured, balanced, blameless. She stopped criticizing and started praising things she used to ignore. "You have been more present lately," she said one morning, watching me dress. Her tone was light, observational. She wanted the compliment to be mistaken for reconciliation. I looked at her in the mirror and said nothing. That same day, I received the bank's final report on the forged signature. The document had been submitted digitally from our home IP 3 months earlier. She had authorized a transfer into a trust account registered to a name that did not exist, a shell alias, a manufactured identity. The trust's beneficiary was her. I sent the report to my legal advisor under a sealed tag. Then I waited. She left town for a 2-day strategy conference that Friday. She posted a photo online of the keynote stage with a caption about advancing narrative tools for human-centered transitions. I saved the image, cross-referenced the metadata. Her photo had been taken before the doors opened. She had not attended the session. Her badge in the image showed a different organization than the one that paid her salary. When I ran a company lookup, it did not exist. That night, while she was still away, I received an email from a mutual acquaintance, someone I had worked with on a civic board 3 years ago. The message was terse. "I thought you should know she has been framing the narrative differently. She implied your absence was a chronic issue, said she had carried the emotional weight alone." I replied with a thank you and attached no documentation. Not yet. When she returned Sunday evening, she brought wine and a small gift box, handwritten note, wrapped in tissue paper. Inside was a keychain engraved with a compass. "You always bring us back," the note said. I stared at it, then placed it on the counter and poured myself a glass of water. She watched me for a moment, her voice stayed even. "I know things have been strained. I want us to be careful with each other." I nodded once. "So do I." That night, she suggested we revisit counseling. I told her to send me the names of the practitioners she had in mind. She never did. Instead, 2 days later, I intercepted a calendar invite. It had been sent from her attorney's office to her private email, the one she used for consulting development. The subject, Preliminary Mediation Framework. I opened the attachment. It outlined asset divisions, timeline recommendations, and optical management strategies for mutual friends and workplace networks. The language was firm, detached, strategically vague. She had removed my name from most of the joint assets in her draft language, framed it as an agreed realignment of obligations. I scheduled a meeting with my own attorney that afternoon. We built a detailed counter-statement, anchored in documented timelines, backed by forensic analysis and digital proof of unilateral financial movement. The package would sit in a private folder, ready to deliver upon official notice. I waited. When her notice arrived 4 days later, it did not come through a conversation. It came through an automated message from a legal account. A downloadable document labeled Separation Consideration Low Conflict Pathway. The opening paragraph read, "This is not an accusation or a blame assignment. This is a reflection of sustained misalignment and a desire to evolve peacefully into independent trajectories." She had folded years of shared life into a sentence designed to sound therapeutic, painless, ethically reasonable. I read it once, closed the file, then opened the audio logs. 3 nights prior, she had called someone unfamiliar voice, possibly a friend or advisor. She said, "He will never fight it. That is why it will work. He will not want a spectacle." She paused, then added, "He does not know how to take up space when it matters." That line stayed in my head longer than it should have. Not because it hurt, because it was familiar. She had said something similar in our 4th year of marriage. After a dinner party where I had remained silent while someone dismissed her ideas about restructuring nonprofit boards, she had said, "You are good at staying silent. You think it is strength. But sometimes silence is complicity." That version of her had believed I was too passive. This version was counting on it. I sent the full documentation to her attorney's office the next morning, along with a formal legal response citing undisclosed transfers, asset misrepresentation, and character misstatements supported by digital records. By noon, she was calling. I did not answer. She tried again, once, then switched to text. "Can we talk? I did not mean for it to unfold like this." I stared at the message. Then I locked my screen and stepped outside. The day was bright, cold air, no wind. For the first time in months, I felt still without being silent. She arrived at the house unannounced the next evening. No message, no warning, just the sound of the car door shutting and her footsteps on the front walk. I opened the door before she could knock. Her face was calm but too still. No anger, no apology, just a professional kind of tension, like someone preparing for a difficult boardroom pitch. "I would prefer we speak without lawyers," she said. I stepped aside, let her in. She walked past the entryway with practiced ease, as if the house still belonged to her in every sense, as if this confrontation could still be managed into a compromise. She sat on the edge of the couch, spine straight, hands folded loosely in her lap. I remained standing. "I read your countersuit," she began. "I want to clear some things." I nodded once. "There was never an intention to damage you. The documents were preemptive, protective. My advisors said it was standard procedure." She said advisors the way some people say weather, as if it happened to her. I replied evenly. "You included statements that framed me as unbalanced. You structured asset removal as neutral realignment. You submitted a digital authorization I never approved, moving a 5-figure amount. That is not protection. That is concealment dressed as clarity." Her jaw flexed. She glanced down, then back up. "You have always been so clinical. That is part of it. I needed permission to leave. I could not find it while you kept acting like everything was functional." "That is because I kept making things functional," I said. She shook her head. "No, you made them stable, not alive. There is a difference." I did not answer. She leaned forward, her elbows now resting on her knees, the posture signaling both exhaustion and urgency. "Look, Carl guided the language," she admitted, her voice tight with restrained justification. "But the feelings were mine. You do not respond. You observe. You wait." And it made me feel like I was dissolving into the background. I did not flinch. My voice was even. "So you tried to erase me first." She recoiled slightly, eyes narrowing as she shot back. "That is not fair." "It is accurate," I said, the words deliberate, unraised. That broke her composure. She stood too fast, her movement jerky, like the room had suddenly constricted. Though her eyes shimmered, her voice remained composed. "I did not expect you to be so prepared." "I know," I replied. She paced a half step, then turned sharply. "You did not even ask me what I wanted. You went straight to defense." I met her eyes without softening, because I had already seen the offense. She moved 1 foot closer, stopped abruptly, and asked in a voice that barely reached across the room, "Do you hate me?" I held the pause long enough to ensure clarity. "No." Her shoulders dropped slightly. "Then why are you looking at me like this is done?" "Because it is." She stayed still for a long moment, then walked past me toward the door. Before she left, she looked back once. "I told myself if you ever fought for something, I would listen." I nodded. "You mistook my silence for surrender. It was timing." She left without closing the door all the way. I watched her car back out. She did not look up. That night, I sent the final round of documentation to the regulatory body that oversaw Carl Henley's licensing, not out of vengeance, but because his involvement had crossed ethical boundaries. His consultancy had steered her into narrative construction while actively exploiting a prior connection to me, his former student. The complaint included anonymized records of her structured exit language and cross-referenced timestamps showing when advice was given, when transfers were made, and when false documentation was filed. I did not send it with a cover letter. I did not need to. 2 weeks later, the investigation began. Carl's public profile was removed. His firm issued a statement about temporary suspension pending review. Quiet, professional, controlled. The way she liked things. She sent no further messages. Instead, she had her attorney call mine. The offer was revision, reduced asset claims, withdrawal of emotional declarations, a mutual dissolution with no public filings of psychological language. No blame. I declined. We proceeded with formal litigation. Her mentor was now under review. Her legal positioning fractured. Her statements recorded, cataloged, annotated. She had tried to climb through a story. I had handed the story back, stripped of staging. When the first hearing date arrived, she did not look at me as she entered the room. Her outfit was subdued. Her notes were in order, but her voice lacked tempo. Her phrasing had shifted, less certainty, less practiced rhythm. The weight of her strategy had settled onto her shoulders. Mine had already lifted. The court proceedings did not become dramatic. That was her second defeat. She had prepared for resistance, for the emotional escalation she could narrate later as evidence of my volatility. But the tone of the room remained clinical. Every statement she submitted was matched with dated documents, objective records, and quiet, measured challenges from my side. She adjusted quickly. She always had a talent for reframing failure as resilience. Her new tone was conciliatory. A woman wronged not by injustice, but by misunderstanding. She repeated that word often. Misunderstanding, not misjudgment, not manipulation, just a soft misalignment of perceptions, harmless, barely her fault. The judge did not comment on her phrasing, but the court stenographer never missed a word. 3 of her most critical claims were dismissed in pre-trial review. Lack of substantiation, inconsistent timelines, contradictions between written declarations and captured conversations. She remained composed during the verdict reading. She had learned to look gracious in silence. What she did not anticipate, what I had withheld until the final hour, was the sealed witness statement from one of her colleagues, a former friend, the person she had called a sounding board in multiple entries across her private notes. That woman had come forward after reviewing the documents I had submitted during pre-trial disclosures. Her written statement described months of coaching on how to position me in conversations, social events, and internal corporate discussions. She had been shown early drafts of declarations, had heard practice versions of phrasing. At one point, she had asked my wife if she thought I deserved the framing. She said, "It is not about what he deserves. It is about what I can carry publicly." The courtroom did not react, but I watched my wife's eyes. For the first time, her face registered something other than practiced neutrality. She had thought she had sealed every exit. She had missed the one voice she never thought would turn. After the hearing, she did not speak to me. Her attorney gathered her things quickly. They left through a side door. I stayed behind, waited for the clerk to confirm the filings. When I stepped outside, the parking lot was nearly empty. Her car was gone. The court awarded me full financial clarity. Restitution for the unauthorized transfers, control of our joint holdings. The trust she had created under her alias was dissolved and reabsorbed into the original account with amended documentation. She received a significantly reduced portion of assets, no spousal maintenance, no injunctive penalties, but a binding non-disclosure clause related to all previously submitted allegations. It was not revenge. It was correction. 3 weeks later, I received a letter from the regulatory board. Carl Henley's consultancy had been stripped of its credentials, not publicly disgraced, not headline news, but internally revoked, quiet revocation of his standing, the kind that ends a career without requiring public explanation. I forwarded the letter to my attorney, filed it, said nothing. Around that time I heard from Aaron, the forensic contact I had used. He said my case was being circulated in closed professional forums, not for scandal, for structure. People are reading it like a map, he said. How to respond without overreacting. I thanked him, then closed the conversation. My wife, or former wife now, attempted a final contact through an indirect channel. A message passed through one of the last mutual acquaintances still willing to relay information. She says she wants closure. Closure. The same word she had used when submitting her first proposal. The same word she had built into every sentence that required me to step back so she could look centered. I declined. There was nothing to close, only residue to dissolve. Her image in professional circles had shifted, not ruined, just narrowed. She still spoke at events, still posted curated content, but the momentum was gone. The keynote invite slowed, the inner circle shrank, people remembered, not everything, but enough. Her strategic affiliations had begun to distance themselves. Not because of scandal, because of caution. That is how reputations erode in her world, not through fire but through omission. Fewer introductions, colder responses, invitations that do not arrive. I did not watch it happen, others told me. I kept my presence quiet, returned to work. Rebuilt with precision, not distraction, discipline. There was no rebound, no public statement, no new partner. She had wanted to leave with a story about growth. What she left behind was documentation. Not a war, an archive.